everyone we know, which is really exciting. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat. We'll be able to get to them in the Q&A portion, which is a little bit later tonight. So let's get going. I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. We have set aside an introduction portion before we dive a little deeper into these questions. So the panelists, they're going to have the opportunity to introduce themselves. They're going to talk a little bit about their background and really speak to the importance of plant-based foods in their work and in their lives. So what we'll do is sort of popcorn style, if that's okay. I'll start by calling on the first panelist, and then at that point you can call on the next, and so forth. So I'm going to start with Rachel Hamilton. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel. My pronouns are she, they. I'm actually the Justice and Equity intern here at San Diego 350, and I work with our JEDI team. Shout out to the JEDI team. So a lot of the work that I do that's outside of San Diego 350, I actually have my own mutual aid with family and friends where we help feed and just give resources, clothes, wellness items to the Black femme community in San Diego, but it's kind of also spread out to just the housing insecure in general. But our first event that really got a lot of attention is that we made plant-based meals for that community first. And we thought that the importance of doing plant-based meals, it comes from the idea of nourishing our community, because you can't be successful, you can't go on to do all these things if you aren't feeling nourished mentally, physically, and spiritually in general. So we went with the more physical, literal sense, and we wanted to give out plant-based food so that we could give back to our community and kind of break that wall of food apartheids in low-income areas in general. So thank you for having me here today, and I'm really excited to speak on this panel, and I will pass to Maddie.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie McMurray. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also a member of San Diego 350. You may know me as the Food and Soil Co-Chair, and I also sit on the member engagement team. My experience with this panel is a lot of interest in the intersectionality of food and environmentalism. And I've done research on wasted food and its social, political, and economic impacts. And I'm just really excited to be able to contribute to the wonderful panel we have here tonight. Riley, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Maddie. My name is Riley. I am the dietitian on the panel tonight. Just hearing from both of you actually makes me already so excited and happy to hear what you guys are doing out there in the community. I think that's amazing, and I can't wait to speak a little bit more on the nutrition side of things. But currently right now I work as the ICU dietitian, so I'm very clinical, like medical nutrition therapy based. That's kind of where my foundation lies. But knowing, how your body processes things and how you can use that to help prevent chronic and acute diseases is something that I'm super passionate about, and I will talk more about that and plant-based foods later on. I will popcorn to Johnny.
Hi, everybody. My name is Johnny Wilson, and I'm the farm director at the Ecology Center in San Juan Capistrano. I've been farming about 15 years in various sites, mainly through the Bay Area and in Sonoma County. And I recently just moved back down to Southern California, actually where I grew up, and to take on the role of the farm director at the Ecology Center. I've been farming lots of different crops, from grains to vegetables to flowers, fruit trees, wine grapes. And I'm just happy to be invited onto the panel. I'm kind of filling in shoes for Jonathan Zeidman, who maybe some of you guys know. So I'm happy to answer or participate wherever I can and see if you guys have any questions for me or about the center. I'll be happy to answer them. And popcorn, I don't know, you have to forgive me. Nicole.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Johnny. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for those wonderful introductions. I see that some of you have put your organization's information in the chat. Please feel free to do that. Share your Instagram, any other social media handles you might have, so that our community can find you later. Now, getting started, I think this is a perfect segue to really start with Johnny, actually. We're really interested in learning more about regenerative agriculture. So if you could take a moment to describe to us what regenerative agriculture is, how it works, and how it benefits the environment.
Sure. Regenerative ag, to me, is kind of a practice of agriculture that gives more than it takes. It aims to build rather than sustain, and create rather than substitute and nourish communities to health. You know, it's beautiful, it's balanced. When you see a regenerative farm, it should remind you of a feeling that you get when you kind of step into a healthy ecosystem, kind of like an old growth forest or maybe a beautiful coral reef. You see mature plants, baby seedlings, trees, and animals. It's balanced, it's diverse, and productive. The people who work the farms should be happy, respected, compensated fairly for their labor. And in general, you know, a regenerative farm should be the symbol of a healthy community, and I think it should be at the forefront of a lot of different healthy communities. You know, you know, at its core, it cycles all the nutrients, and you know, it really seeks to sustain healthy ecosystems and provide food for everybody in a healthy, nourishing way for generations to come.
Oh, thank you so much for that informative answer. I was picturing that farm that you were talking about, and I want to go there. It's incredible. And sort of a follow-up question to that one is really, what scale can regenerative agriculture be done on? You know, mass scale or more small farmer scale?
I think it can be done at any scale, really. There's great examples of good regenerative practices on all levels. You know, there's really well cared for farms in the Midwest on thousands and thousands of acres. Rodale's doing a lot of good work with regenerative farming on mass scales with their no-till, growing large grains for commodity crops, you know, all the way down to the community garden scale. So I think it's endless, and I also think it's a process and a journey, and we're kind of learning as we go of really what it takes to be regenerative. It's kind of a new buzzword in ag, and so I think as more and more people begin to kind of live into the practice, we'll see what kind of scales that's really successful at. So, but in general, I think it's, you know, it can be practiced really at any scale.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I know in my own sort of learning about regenerative agriculture, I've been really surprised, excited about how many people already use carbon farming, regenerative agriculture as a means to take care of the land. And we hope that more people can do that on a small and large scale. And so another question we had for you is there a connection between regenerative agriculture and low or zero waste farming techniques?
I think so. I guess if the question is, you know, are there ways to produce food that basically we can provide all of our own inputs without producing any excess? And I think that, yeah, we can do that. Through you know, a series of different cover cropping techniques, having creating your own fertility, practicing crop rotation, and things of that nature. We can hopefully eliminate all of our waste in the farming system. You know, and also maybe thinking about a little bit broader scale within the communities of identifying places where we are generating waste and using farms and as kind of carbon sinks for lots of various things that get wasted in the communities. So I think absolutely it's a key piece of having these kind of regenerative farms in our communities that are able to act as both, waste equals food, right? So how to identify where the waste streams are and how some of the farms can take some of those organic materials and store them in the soil through, various composting, carbon sinks. We're starting a program with our, we have about 600 farm share members through our CSA program right now at the Ecology Center. And one of the main kind of first quarter objectives is we're going to be designing out a, basically a compost action plan with our community members and figuring out how we can get all of our food waste back from our community members and compost it on the farm in order to, reproduce the food and cycle all those nutrients. So I think there absolutely is a connection to those two things.
That's really incredible to speak to creating a healthy life cycle of sorts. And I know that Maddie, being on the Food and Soil Committee, this is a topic that you all are working on. And I just want to invite everyone on the panel to step in, figuratively, I guess, to join in the conversation at any point too. Yeah. So
can I just say one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think especially too, and if we're thinking about urban systems, and urban regenerative farms like we are in our community, the community idea of looking for resources and providing some inputs in the community that's already existing is going to be a big thing for us and those in urban environments, right? Because we don't have the landscapes or whatever, maybe to house animals, to provide fertility. So using the community as a resource is going to be essential for urban farms like ours.
Yeah, one of the things that Food and Soil is looking at is a lot of climate action plans and ways that we can create and encourage governments to create or to fund and then roll out programs which would collect green and brown waste to be able to go back to farms like yours. Because San Diego has a great opportunity in that, Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong, but it has the largest number of small farms in California, I think, or at least in Southern California.
That sounds like a Jonathan Seidman quote.
So there's a lot of opportunity here for regenerative agriculture to really take root, figuratively and literally speaking, and for the region to really grow from that.
For sure.
And that really reminded me of something I learned recently. I think San Diego County currently has 3 landfills that are operational, and 2 of them are going to be completely full in the next 3 to 5 years, I believe, which will put us down to 1 operational landfill for the entire county. So it just makes me think the more ways we can be strategic and use the community and avoid waste, let's do it. Thank you so much. So now we're going to be moving on to some health impacts, talking about plant-based foods and how that is going to not only affect the climate and the environment, but how it'll affect us personally. So I'm going to direct this next question to Riley. Could you speak to some of the benefits there are when people feature plants more readily on their plates? Maybe speak to what are some of the detriments, if any, to having a meat-heavy diet versus a plant-based diet.
Absolutely. So in regards to plant-based eating, I do want to start out by just kind of clarifying that plant-based doesn't necessarily mean that you are vegan or vegetarian, right? It's the idea that we are building the foundation of our plate with plant sources. So we're proportionally choosing those items so that more of our food consumption is coming from plant sources. And the benefits of doing this, there's many. So longevity, meaning longer lifespans, lower BMIs, so people, obesity is less prevalent. There's less risk for cardiovascular diseases, even some cancers, as well as help managing people who have chronic diabetes, things like that. So there are, like I said before, many benefits to choosing plants more readily, and that's mainly because when you are choosing, whole food sources, you're getting an abundance of vitamins, minerals, all those great antioxidants, phytonutrients, a lot of fiber, things that people typically don't get in the average Western diet, right? When we are eating a more meat-heavy diet, it's not necessarily that the meat is bad per se, or that we can never have it or something like that. It's just more so proportions. People that are choosing meat heavier, more starches, it comes down to nutrient density and what you are actually putting into your body and the proportions of those macronutrients. So our macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, and fats, all three major things we need to sustain life. So there's actually been several, sorry, am I going too far?
This is awesome.
Okay. Just stop me because I can get like going.
We love it.
But in reference to meat heavy diets, there's actually been studies that have shown that a high intake of red meats, processed meats are associated with, like I told you about, higher risk for certain diseases. So actually, one daily serving of unprocessed red meat was associated with 13% increased risk of death from cardiovascular disease or cancer. And a daily serving of processed red meat from like hot dogs or bacon or even like deli meats, things like that are highly processed, 20% increased risk of death from cardiovascular disease and cancer. So we are seeing things in the evidence that line up with these types of things. Once again, it's more so being mindful about the items that you are choosing, learning how to make small steps to incorporate more plant-based foods in your meals, choosing variety, choosing different cooking sources, getting outside the box, shopping the perimeter at your grocery stores, focus on whole foods versus processed foods. Sorry, we can like move on.
No, this is really awesome. Thank you so much, Riley, for breaking that down for us. And I especially appreciated the part where you said, plant-based is not a one-size-fits-all way of eating or living. Even just trying to incorporate or inviting more vegetables, plant-based things, etc., into your onto your plate it sounds like a ton of benefits. And having access to folks like you just to start that education or continue that education rather is really what we're we hope to provide to folks today. And you even provided some really great resources, right? Like shopping the perimeter of the grocery store. And I know we'll speak more to access and address food apartheid also. That's wonderful. And then I think there was another question we had in terms of providing information about types of foods. So some of the types of foods that came to mind were processed versus whole foods. Also this idea of trend foods like acai and goji berries. If you want to speak to those types of foods and address any of that, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Definitely. So I kind of, at the end of my tangent there, I was talking about processed versus whole foods. So essentially, in the most clear-cut definition, a whole food versus a processed food is something that is one ingredient versus more than one ingredient. So obviously things like vegetables, fruits, grains, those are what they are. They come from the earth. We are blessed to have them, and they're so good for us. But processed foods typically have more than one obviously ingredient, but I kind of like to stick to the 5 rule if you can. So when you're looking at labels, that's so important to look at labels. Like I said, obviously start your grocery shopping or plan around whole foods, but obviously when we do, it's okay in moderation, but just be mindful of those products that you're using. Look at the back of the labels, look at the ingredient list. I try to stick to, like I said, 5 or more, like that's more processed than I would like, but obviously we're all human. And if I want to have ice cream or an Oreo, I can, that's okay. But just kind of being mindful of those things and looking at how to read a nutrition label. I can also offer some other like links and resources to you guys later that can help with that as well. And then in terms of like trend foods like goji berries and acai, So the typical reason why I think that they have blown up right over the past, I guess, like 7 years or so, is just because they are antioxidant powerhouses, where many of our fruits and vegetables do have, phytonutrients and antioxidants. So it's like beta carotene, anthocyanins, they have all these crazy names, which benefit our body in fighting off free radicals. But like the goji berry, it more so is so popular because it packs a punch in such a small amount. So that's why people are raving about them, calling them superfoods, just because compared to our typical other like fruits like blueberries or strawberries or something like that, they have a lot more, they're more nutrient dense in those super antioxidant fighting qualities than others. But obviously we have to still stay a little bit mindful, because balance is everything. It's not a one-stop shop. I'm going to eat like a whole giant bag of goji berries and I'm healthy, right? You also have to take in consideration the sugar content, what else is going on in there, and how it plays into your role and like how you live your life in the diet that you abide by.
Yeah, it sounds like with anyone's health journey, for instance, it's an ongoing process, and it's really about sort of assessing your relationship with food, and I know that a lot of folks here, would encourage that relationship to be healthy. So it's important to kind of to look at the ingredients, but also know that everyone's human and balance is key. So thank you so much to speaking to those things. And so this next question, in terms of transitioning maybe to a plant-based diet, or just inviting more plant-based foods into your diet, are there things that people might want to keep in mind when transitioning to eating more plant-based foods? Some of the things we thought of were just the making sure that you're getting enough B12 and iron and certain things like that.
Right, absolutely. So in terms of like the B12 and the iron, I associate those more with people who are going completely vegan, no animal products whatsoever, which is important to keep in mind. If we're, just transitioning to going plant-based, typically if you're still eating, dairy and eggs and maybe meat here and there, I wouldn't typically be worried about those items specifically. It's more like I talked about before, getting balance, getting variety so that you have all of those nutrients in your diet. But for vegans, for instance, if you don't eat any animal products, B12 is huge. You have to definitely be mindful about that. B12 is made by a bacteria, actually. So the reason why it's in animal products is because we hold on to it into our bodies for many years. So those animals have it naturally in their flesh, and that's where typically we get the source of B12 from. I know there's some in also like different nutritional yeasts as well. And there's been different studies done on that as well, but I wouldn't rely on that entirely. If you are vegan, I would still recommend supplementing. There's different forms of B12 as well. The most commonly found one in stores is I can't ever say this, cyanocobalamin. It's the most stable, well-researched form, and we know that it's bioavailable to your body and you can absorb it readily. As for iron, there's different types of iron. There's heme versus non-heme. Heme iron is found in meat, poultry, fish, that type of thing, and the others are plant sources. So typically, if you're eating a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, you are going to be getting, enough iron. And if you felt like you didn't always pair food that has iron, you can also eat like vitamin C with it, because vitamin C helps increase the absorption of iron. So they kind of work together that way. And a lot of like cereal grains are also fortified with iron as well. So I wouldn't be as necessarily worried about that one. And then what is another? I could talk about omega-3s and omega-6s. I know I just don't want to go over time. I guess that's the only issue here. But also very important, if you aren't eating any fish products, then getting your omega-3s can be a little bit of a challenge. They are, however, in like flax, walnuts, and chia seeds. Make sure that you are either chewing them well or getting the ground versions, just because the capsule, like the outside shell that they're encapsulated in, when we eat them, most of the times it doesn't get fully broken down and digested and will just be excreted in the same form. So just make sure that those are being, well chewed, or get the ground versions as well. So by getting those as well, their ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, there's been some studies done on that as well. With vegetarians specifically, are typically a little bit lower in that ratio. And omega-6s, they are necessary. Both omega-3 and 6 are necessary, meaning we cannot make them in our bodies. We have to get a dietary source from them. So we have to make sure that, we're getting at least an even proportion, if not a little bit more omega-3s than omega-6s. Just because if you're getting a little bit more omega-6, it can be a more pro-inflammatory response, which then leads to oxidative stress and other things in our body that can increase risk for chronic disease. Whew.
Oh my gosh, Riley, I'm learning so much, and I'm sure everyone else on the call is as well. We are so appreciative of all of that information. I've noticed a few people have put some questions in the chat based off of what we've already discussed, and I just want to let you all know that we will get to those questions in the Q&A portion, so please keep adding them and responding to what you hear. Thank you so much, Riley. And I think we do have time actually for this last question for you. And not necessarily the last question. You, of course, can participate in the other part of the panel. But if you have an example of a patient who maybe made a transition and how it changed their life, or just any examples in general of how you've seen plant-based eating improve folks' livelihoods.
Mm-hmm. So not only in my own experience, but also my fellow colleagues' experiences, we see it quite often, which is amazing and so reassuring for us as well, just to be able to see the actual significant changes that people can make in their lifestyle. And you're not ever too old or too late. I think that's something that I'm big on as well. So education obviously is very, very important, and I'm so happy that we're all doing this. But so for instance, I had a patient who was obese, had chronic hypertension, and also had type 2 diabetes. And it was more of in an outpatient counseling situation. So definitely a lot of time spent, but as we were able to include more plant-based options, like I said, it was definitely a process, especially for somebody who's not used to doing that, or maybe not be at a stage where they're ready to be fully acceptive of that. But at the end of the day, we were able to get him off of his cholesterol medications, his blood pressure medications, and he was able to maintain his A1C below 7, which is recommended for our patients with diabetes. So I mean, wow, right? Just the power of nourishing your body properly. Exercise is huge too, so that was definitely a component. But really, truly, you take the time, you put the effort in, you learn how to nourish your body well, and you can make a huge difference in your lifestyle and, for years to come. And you can pass that on to other members of your family, other members of your community, and that's why I love what I do.
Well, we can definitely feel your energy, and I'm so energized by the information you just shared. And it's so exciting to know that by committing to eating more plant-based and also infusing exercise, that we could really be kind of in ownership of our health. And so that's really exciting to know. Thank you so much, Riley. And again, feel free to participate in other parts of the panel. So now we're going to be moving to discuss accessibility of plant-based foods. So this is a really important part of the conversation. And so I'll be directing these questions to Rachel, Maddie, and even Riley if you'd like to participate as well. So the first question that I'd like to ask, to no one in particular, but how would you prevent waste in our communities? Majority of waste is from the consumer end of things, not from the rest of the supply chain. So in terms of just diverting waste in our communities and utilizing our communities, what does that look like?
Well, I definitely think I could start with that, especially as someone who's not necessarily I don't have, I'm not an expert in policy, let's say like policy legislator and how that works on a city level, but more, I have an understanding of like just the everyday life of community members who might be living in low income situations and things of that nature. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that a lot of the communities that are making this waste, they might be coming from people who already are being or having to work two jobs, or they're taking care of their kids, and they don't have access to healthy grocery stores near them. So waste is kind of the last thing on their level. But I think it's important that we start with government funded education on food waste. Sorry, I have food waste because I'm just thinking plant-based foods in general. So I'm sure this can apply to others, but I'm just talking more in the sense of food waste. But I think that education is definitely a great starting point, because when education happens in the community now becomes aware. And once they're aware, we can start talking about options like donating excess foods to community food banks, actively trying to buy less food altogether, or even composting and donating. I think Johnny said this earlier, but donating to our local gardens and farms who are already doing this work. So I definitely think that a first big step that would get families who maybe aren't thinking about this stuff initially could definitely start with education. And I know down in Chula Vista, we're now going to have compost in 2022, which is really cool. I'm really excited about that. And I just started this journey, but even with that, I acknowledge that it came with me having the time to look into this and having the funds to get a compost bin and things of that. So I think, I definitely think education is the first step because it's free. So.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Rachel was saying. You know, I'm glad that you brought up what Johnny had mentioned earlier about reconnecting with the communities and taking in waste to then bring into the regenerative ag farms, because I think that would be a really great way to both prevent waste, and then with what Riley was speaking about is getting people more connected with whole foods and teaching people and having that free, like that educational resource of interacting with soil and being part of growing the food that you're having. I think a lot of community gardens are ways that people will actually address like food apartheids in different neighborhoods. And it's really great to see like the myriad of ways that people are starting to kind of close that circle again and become reconnected.
Wow, thank you both so much for sharing that. It just really emphasizes the importance of bringing the information to the community and supporting the community. And communities are, as we all know, resilient. And so starting there and providing access centrally, I think is a really great starting point. Now, in terms of legislative opportunities, I think I might be directing this question to Maddie. Can you speak to the legislative opportunities in order to increase access to these types of foods?
Definitely. So when I was doing research on wasted food, there was a fact that I found that your average grocer throws away about $2,000 worth of food, and it's purely for things like expiration dates, which are manufacturer designed. They're not overseen by like the FDA or the USDA. So you could do a lot of legislative work at a national level to figure out more stringent ways that you can label things so that they're still safe for consumption, right? Because we don't want people eating food that would make them sick. But definitely creating things where that food that would otherwise be thrown away simply because it's quote unquote expired would then be given to food pantries or be given out for free in a lot of communities. And obviously this is not an ideal situation for houseless individuals, but there are laws against dumpster diving. So even taking food from dumpsters can get you arrested. And that is a really just inhumane way of trying or of like addressing what is like a lack of a public service that should be offered by a government. And so one thing that a Senate bill in California is seeking to address. It's Senate Bill 1383 for anybody who wants to do more research on it. But the goal for the bill is that by 2025, California is going to recover 20% of that edible food that would otherwise be discarded into landfills, and it's going to be then diverted to feed people who are actually in need. And so there are a number of different ways that you can legislatively transform the political environment to then give back to the community that should be getting all of this food that is being sent to it, right? Like, just because you don't have the financial access to food doesn't mean that you should be barred from having the physical access to it.
Nicole, if I could jump on that. So just to Maddie's point of the $2,000 in waste that a lot of these grocers actually end up throwing out that could be transition to our housing insecure individuals. We know San Diego has a very large housing insecure community in general. With my experience with my mutual aid, actually had experiences in which because we are not technically an organization, we weren't able to get like day old bread or things of that nature when we were trying to pass it out. So I definitely think that legislature that was a bit, I wouldn't say relaxed, but things that were a bit more kind upon groups or just community members wanting to get day old food or just things of that nature so that we could redistribute. I think that would be wonderful. Another thing, I know I said I'm not very big on legislature, I apologize. But something that I think that was really important, and I once again apologize for all my legislature people, policy people, but something that kind of acknowledged earlier I said food apartheid, and if anyone is unaware of that term, it's the term that is usually used is food desert, and it's to kind of explain the lack of whole foods or organic grocers in lower income, especially Black and brown neighborhoods. But food apartheid kind of describes that in a more it describes it a bit better because it shows that it's purposeful and that it's not an accident. So that's why I'm choosing to use that term instead. But I think that a legislature that kind of addressed organic grocers and healthy food stores that purposefully don't go into these neighborhoods, these Black and brown neighborhoods, or who use socioeconomic status as a tool for where they should locate themselves. I'm talking about Trader Joe's in specific. I'm sure others do it as well. I think that there should be a fine for that. And I don't know how to start that. I don't know if anyone here is interested in starting that, but I think that'd be an awesome thing to kind of protect our lower class Black and brown communities from food apartheids and scarcity. So
that's a great point.
Wow.
May I ask something, because I have to unfortunately leave at 8, and I just wanted to get the number. That's SB 1383 on the food recovery. Maddie, you mentioned it.
Maddie.
Sorry, my mute button disappeared. It's 1383, Nancy. Yeah.
And that's state or federal? I'm sorry.
That's a state, so it's the state of California.
Okay. Well, make sure the legislative committee's tracking that and aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy. Great question. I know some other folks had that question also. And thank you, Rachel and Maddie, so much for sharing your thoughts, sharing your perspective on these really important questions. Definitely thinking about community and access, and for clarifying the use of apartheid, because it really does come down to these are systems that were human made and they are sustained by humans, and we really want to break that down. And legislation is definitely one way. I know that Rachel's rallying the people right now. We're gonna build a movement, so hop on to that movement if you're interested. Another question we have, which both Maddie and Rachel have already touched on, but if you could speak to maybe a little bit more, is accessibility dependent upon food apartheids and community structures. So again, we've discussed that more, but if there's anything else you want to share, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, Maddie, do you want to start, or is it okay if I go?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think it might not be obvious to all, but I think it's obvious to a large portion of us that accessibility is dependent on race and ethnicity. A lot, especially in the United States, we have a very large history of white supremacy, and that flows through every single one of our systems. I don't think food is an exception. So yeah, I definitely believe that race and proximity, especially regarding Blackness, is really has a point in the food apartheids that we see in our communities in general. And I also believe that economic standing also has a large part to do with that, with in access to healthy foods. And I think the U.S. has done a great job at finding a way to intersect lower income with BIPOC communities and just keeping them there. So I don't think that it's an accident. But I don't think that it's not only common to find fast food places throughout these neighborhoods, but it's purposeful. We go back to thinking about like the Federal Housing Act and starting with redlining and it's residential segregation, especially as someone who grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Ohio. I just moved to San Diego a couple of years ago. So I grew up in this kind of environment and in these areas. And it's so, I wouldn't say odd, but it's shocking for when I hear that some individuals don't understand how they are completely dependent on those two things, especially with the history of white supremacy being used to disenfranchise Black and Brown communities by creating these residential areas and kind of shoving people in these certain sides. It's easier to decide what goes where. So when you already have Brown and Black people, lower income people in a certain area, it's not as confusing when you start putting, let's say, Carl's Jr.'s and not Whole Foods, and then saying, well, they can't afford it, so we're not going to put it there, and just continuing this cycle of disenfranchising of these groups in America. Yeah, so I definitely think it's on us to start recognizing these things, and that's why I said something about finding these companies that are purposely not moving into these areas, because if we think about it, everyone has a part to play in this. Corporations definitely have a part to play in this. Government has a part to play, but also we, the community, have a huge part to play in this. And this is why we do the work that we're doing. Yeah, and bringing plant-based options and foods and access to these communities, because they deserve it. Everyone deserves access to healthy foods. It shouldn't be a privilege, although sadly in this reality it is. So.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with everything that Rachel has said. And I just want to specifically highlight that like accessibility isn't just financial. Accessibility can also be the time that it takes for you to get to and from the grocery store, the time that it takes to prepare meals that are from Whole Foods versus the amount of time it may take to go through a drive-through. You know, if you have a family and you work 2 different jobs to afford your rent, you're not going to have as much time to prepare a meal as a family who has a parent that either works from home or has the ability to just be a homemaker as their mode of employment. Also, when we look at the structure of food, it's very much in line with what Rachel was saying, where if you look at historically redlined communities, there are a lot of freeways that break up access for public transit to be able to take people quickly and swiftly to where they need to go. Financial barriers are obviously an access, but then accessibility for people who actually live in the communities to open services that would be able to uplift their own communities. I think a lot of frontline communities are familiar and unfortunately see a lot of gentrification from cheaper rent. So you get a lot of plant-based eateries or new trendy food sites that pop up where places have cheaper rent. And then that invites an influx of people with like greater economic status into an area and then pushes out those residents. So when we look at the development of neighborhoods, food plays a large role in that, even if we may not have already been aware that could have been the seed being planted to bring it back to food and gardening, which is one of the reasons that I think, again, I keep saying community gardens, but community gardens are really just so powerful, because to be able to have, you know, that free access to food. And back to our legislation question, Ron Finley is an activist farmer up in Los Angeles who is planting gardens in the medians of streets, or like that area of sidewalk that's usually dirt, quite honestly, if you're in LA. And he was actually cited by the city for providing free food to his communities. So creating legislation that uplifts instead of punishes people that are trying to provide free access that connects those gaps, I think is also vital if we're going to begin to address the inequity that this country has continually perpetuated.
That is some powerful stuff. Thank you so much, Rachel and Maddie. It just reminds me that, you know, we as a community, as people in the community, we either contribute to the problem or contribute to the solution. So we have a part to play as well. And I think Jonathan wanted to add something to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. I work with Johnny, so wanted to kind of share a few thoughts on how the Ecology Center plays a role in this conversation. Accessibility is incredibly important to us. And I think just as as a farm, and we have a different role than a restaurant or a grocer, but we do have a few different kind of touch points with the community because we have a farm stand, have a unique perspective as to how we address this issue. So first off, we donate 20% of what we grow coming off of our farm through the front door. So that's built into our pricing model. And given that we are direct to consumer, it's something that we can financially prioritize as an organization. And whether or not any other grocer, restaurant, or farm can do the same thing, I think that there are creative ways to get to that solution. We also then take anything that's a little bit wilty or a little bit withery, still perfectly edible out of our farm stand, and we put it on a table in front called our share table, and that's accessible to anyone that might want it for free. What we're trying to do is, the name is Maddie, really do the opposite of what has been this food waste issue, in which you have perfectly good food that's being thrown out, and on top of that, you're criminalizing people for trying to access it. We want to create avenues in which, with dignity, anyone can have access to the highest quality possible organic, fresh, local, seasonal, sustainable ingredients, and they're welcome to come in. And then on top of that, if you kind of think of it as a pyramid of uses, we then take any other ingredients that may not necessarily have the aesthetic value or qualities, and then put them into an actual packaged meal. So maybe you're making a soup, or you're making what I like to call rice, beans, and greens bowls, right? Where you're just giving people nutritious, hearty, healthy meals and distributing those for free in the community. I don't see any reason why any institution couldn't replicate some or all of those practices. I think one of the barriers is manpower or labor, but with the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Act, it really takes away any sort of liability that an organization or business might face in doing that work. And when we put the call out, the Ecology Center, saying we want to feed people, we get 10 to 20 times more volunteer response than we can actually handle for that initiative, right? And we're a larger organization, but the point is, anyone that wanted to do this work in earnest, that started to build community, could equally build a volunteer force that would be inspired and mobilized to try to help their community and help package that food, or help put it aside, or help distribute it in a way in which maybe a small farm or business might say, I don't have the manpower to be able to, run my restaurant and also distribute this free food. So there are definite creative solutions when you seek them.
And yeah, I think one of the things that Food and Soil looks a lot at is ways that we can encourage people to act local and engage with local farms for reasons like you just outlined, Jonathan. Like, you have a lot more, embeddedness within your community and desire to give back. And so it's that way that you can continue that cycle of giving. For anybody here who's interested in doing a CSA, definitely look into the resources that we have on the San Diego 350 website. Like, look at really engaging with your local farmers, because more often than not, they have phenomenal programs just like that.
And thank you all so much. And thank you, Jonathan, for sharing about the Ecology Center and the great work that you are doing there. it's so important that we have these conversations, and also that they are accessible to people, and that we are able to provide the information and the resources to communities. So moving forward, I know the great work will continue, and I'm excited to participate and support, and I hope that all of you will do so as well. So now we're going to shift to one of our last questions, or one of our last sections before the final question. And this really has to speak to the history of plant-based diets, being, for lack of a better word, culturally based and co-opted by colonizers. And so I'd like to open the floor, I think, to Rachel and Maddie to speak to this. And I know that there's this perception of plant-based eating as being predominantly a white trend, when I know you'll speak to the realities of veganism being largely distributed among BIPOC communities. So I'll open that up to both of you to speak to.
Yeah, Maddie, do you want to go first?
Sure. If you don't have anything to, if you want me to go first, I'll go first on this one. So
Okay.
I think that with this question, there's kind of this sense of novelty that some people will approach veganism with, or new foods with, and when in reality things like tofu and chia seeds and quinoa have actually been a part of like Eastern and indigenous cultures for ages. And so understanding that we are participating in like the cultural traditions of another group is really important. And then also looking at the ways that that food is grown for us, right? Like, and the way that it's harvested. So a really great example of this would be like quinoa. So when quinoa hit, mainstream diet trends like in the West, all of a sudden it was no longer affordable to many of the people who grew it in South America. And so just being conscientious of the types of food that we're eating and focusing on eating more locally and sourcing a lot of our food from local growers is a really great way to make sure that we're acting responsibly within a global supply chain and not taking advantage of other communities and extracting and creating systems of inequity in countries abroad.
Yeah. And I think I would like to just touch on, I guess, veganism from an American standpoint. When we think of veganism and how it's seen in America with our culture and its co-optedness, I think much like many other facets of our culture, veganism has been historically whitewashed. And especially with food apartheids happening and being a direct result of white supremacy, I once again think that veganism is purposefully seen as this way in this culture. I think that when we keep veganism in a lens of whiteness, we completely erased the many Black, Indigenous, and brown cultures that have historically been vegan. And it also allows us to gatekeep healthy plant-based foods from these communities, and it kind of goes back to that cycle of low-income Black, brown communities. So once we turn it into this trend, it's seen as something that everyone is it's privilege. It's seen as a privilege all over again, even though these vegan restaurants are moving into these economically low-income areas, into these Black areas. The prices aren't for the people in that area, they are for other people to come in. So I just think it's just fallen victim to the same cycle of white supremacy and just I'm thinking of the correct words, but just placing whiteness as centering whiteness. I think that's what it's become victim to. And once again, I think that once we start recognizing the history of these foods, like even goji berries that Riley brought up earlier, and understanding that those are derived from Asia, and that these cultures have had these for a very long time. Once we start acknowledging that and understanding the history, and start, I in a sense, normalizing these foods and not seeing it as like this hot trend commodity that's like, I have to get it, just understanding that, hey, this has great health benefits. This is delicious, and just allowing it to be normalized so that it's not put on this pedestal and become something that others can't obtain, I think that will definitely help with a social understanding of veganism and the diversity, the true diversity of it. And I think that's a great step that we can make as individuals, because I don't think we can all make the big step of corporations to stop like promoting them as these fun trends, but I think we can do this as an individual and work on that as a community.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to Rachel's point, you know, about a lot of veganism being predominantly like white facing or white presenting, and just really feeding into the white supremacist like narrative. There have been a lot of polls by Gallup that show, you know, like 3% of Americans are vegan, but that number jumps up to 8% when you look at, they pulled it as like African Americans, but like the Black community. And then people in the United States, like 16% of them are looking at incorporating more plants into their diet. And that number doubles basically to like 31% when you look at people from Black and brown communities. And so there are a lot of people that are seeking to make these changes, but because whether it's with social media algorithms that are racist in the ways that they present information, or whether it's with media news cycles, a lot of these really great resources, like the one that Jonathan shared for Rolling Roots in the chat, they really go under, like they fall, excuse me, my voice and my words are failing me right now. they fail to have that same level of attention, and that same level of attention and that same level of, I guess, credit given to the movements that are being fostered within those communities.
Wow. Thank you both so much for speaking to that really important piece of this conversation. And again, thank you to all of the panelists for participating tonight. We are a little bit off on time, I apologize, but you all just had such wonderful things to share, and we really wanted to keep it flowing, and I think the conversation did. So now we do have some time for the Q&A. I know there were some really great questions that popped up in the chat, so I think we have about 5 minutes or so to try to address these questions, and I'll actually hand it over to Max, who has compiled some of these really great questions for us.
Great, thanks. And yeah, if anyone else has questions, feel free to post them in the chat and I'll get to them as well. I'm gonna kind of just tackle each person here in terms of hitting some of these questions that are directed towards you. So Johnny, if you're still here, we have a question from Charlene asking about the difference, if there is any, between permaculture and regenerative agriculture.
I can answer if Johnny's not around or if he's muted. I would say that permaculture is a tenet of regenerative agriculture. Regenerative organic agriculture is actually a new certification that's being promoted by Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's and a few farms that have been doing this work in earnest for a while. So if you think of organic as a certification that's been in use for 25 years, that's really the floor. It's not the ceiling. Organic just means we're not spraying poison on food. So regenerative organic is this new movement that is meant to honor, as Johnny said, animals, protect soil, and treat people well. So those are the three tenets, of which permaculture is intertwined in every single one of those.
Yeah, and I would just add to, you know, these terms are ways that, you know, we're basically trying to tell people in the community who are buying food and guide them towards good decisions on how their dollars are going to impact, you know, the planet, right? And over time, the lexicon of organic ag has changed, and it's incorporated more and more. And as we go further down this road, we try to come up with new words as kind of the old ones kind of lose meaning, or they get co-opted, like the word like organic, like Jonathan was just saying. I think really the important point, though, as far as the terminology goes, is it comes down to less about the terminology, and it's just more about knowing your farmer, more local food in the hands of more communities that's healthy grown. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the terms of what we're describing of how we're trying to just keep healthy food in the hands of healthy and get them into people so we have community health.
Got it. Ooh, this next question was on terminology.
That's okay.
Okay. All right. So Alex wanted to know about silvopasture, and is this a type of specific regenerative agriculture, or is it something distinct? Maybe just a little bit on what that is, if you've heard of it.
Yeah, silvopastoral, as far as my knowledge goes, it's basically a system that incorporates animals and pastures in a kind of under tree canopies. So it's a type of a regenerative system. Regenerative could mean, a big umbrella. And, a silvopastoral system could be a regenerative system. The actual term, it's kind of like the organic thing. It's like, the people that have defined this term, or regenerative organic, like Rodale, there's lots of different specific practices that you need to follow in order to kind of use the word regenerative. And now it's kind of like been being thrown around in these conversations about, it's beyond organic, is regenerative. And then so sure, a silvopastoral system could be regenerative if they kind of follow the guidelines set forth by like the committee or this group of organizations that Jonathan described that came up with the word in order to use it as, to sell something on the marketplace as regenerative.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you. And this question from Christine, she was asking about regenerative farming products. Are these affordable? Where can you access them? How does that work for someone who's interested in, starting to farm or do business that way?
Yeah, well, Jason, you can chime in here too, but there aren't many like certified regenerative farms out there, so I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, as far as the certification goes, I don't know like how many actual products are out there that are being farmed by certified, like quote unquote certified regenerative farms, because it's a relatively new certification and they're just prototyping it. So anybody loosely throwing that term around, whether or not they're inspected by a regenerative ag inspector, I don't know, and as that relates to affordability, I think that I think that there are obviously ways to make them affordable. I mean, let's not let that get in the way of getting healthy food to healthy communities. I think there's lots of creative solutions. I like Jay-Z hit it on in his, what he was.
Real quick. The pilot regenerative organic farm is Apricot Lanes up by Ventura. There was a documentary made about it called Biggest Little Farm, which is good, and I recommend a lot of people watch. They just happened to be working with Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's as this was rolled out. The Ecology Center will be a regenerative organic farm. As soon as we work through that process, I welcome anyone to come visit us. We're in San Juan Capistrano, a little bit closer. And then we have a farm in Encinitas as well, but that's closed because it's on a school site. But I would, like Johnny said, would not get hung up specifically on certifications, just like there are many farms that are doing organic practices and are not certified organic for one reason or many. The most important thing, as Johnny mentioned, is build a relationship with that farm. Go check it out and see if you feel comfortable with their practices. Do you feel comfortable with the amount of waste or how they're treating animals or people, and make your own decision.
Terrific. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate that. And then I just have a couple quick questions here for you, Riley. So one, Eric was asking if you could share in the chat, or you can just say it out loud here, the names of the B12 you recommended for vegans. There's some.
Oh yeah, so it's called cyanocobalamin. I'll put it in the chat. But it's like I said before, the most stable, the most well-studied, and it's also the cheapest as well. So essentially our body takes that and breaks it down into two different forms that we can absorb. So I would go with that one.
Terrific. Thank you. And also, can you touch on manufactured vegetable oils? Is there any type of nutritional benefits or any type of insight you'd like to provide on those?
Right, I did read that comment. So in reference to manufactured vegetable oils, not all plant oils are created equally, right? So there are some that are better for you, the ones that are like polyunsaturated. So that's going to be like your olive oils, avocado oil, anything that is usually, unrefined, extra virgin. Those are going to be in their purest form. So that's kind of what I would go with. I also wanted to touch on coconut oil a little bit. I know nobody asked about it, but coconut oil is actually 90% saturated fat. So just wanted to keep that in mind. I know that like in regards to trend foods and things like that as well, That's been kind of popular lately. So just want to be mindful that usually fats that are solid at room temperature have saturated fats, and saturated fats are linked to higher risks of heart disease.
That's great. I use coconut oil all the time.
It's not that it's bad. It's just like, you know, you don't want to be like slathering it on and everything. It's, you know, similar to even like the amounts of butter and lard and things like that in terms of saturated fat content.
Really good to know. Well, thank you so much, Kylie. I do want to mention that there's been so many great resources shared in this chat. So I am going to save this chat, and then I will work with Nicole to get an email together for everyone who attended, and share some of these resources and the names of the organizations that our various panelists are working for, so you can learn more about that, and who to reach out to if you want to get involved or have a conversation. And so I just want to say what a remarkable panel this was. We've done a lot of these, and I think this was one of the better ones that we've had, with just such a diverse range of knowledge from so many different people. And thank you guys very much. It was extremely insightful. And if you guys have a quick second to hang on, I'm going to pass it back to Nicole just to make some final announcements.
I absolutely agree with you, Max. This panel is amazing. All of the panelists are so well-informed, and just the way you are able to talk about this information in a really accessible way is super exciting. So thank you for participating tonight. And thank you to our community for showing up, for asking great questions, for being engaged, and hopefully together we can continue to do the great work that's needed and support these really important issues. So before I log off, we are gonna just do some brief announcements, because we have some more really amazing events happening this month and next month. So for the first event that we wanted to highlight, I'll pass it to Maddie, who can speak to our upcoming climate chat.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, and thanks everyone again for joining us today. So if the conversation here piqued your interest in any of the topics that we discussed, the Food and Soil Committee is actually holding a climate chat on Thursday, January 28th. So that's a week from this upcoming Thursday, and it starts at 7 p.m. And we've got a lot of great representatives from South Bay and from San Diego 350 talking more on regenerative agriculture, talking more about accessibility. I dropped the sign up link in the chat, so please go ahead and sign up, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Maddie. In the chat is our link to how you can register to upcoming events, so feel free to check that out. In addition to the climate chat, we are going to have another monthly meeting next month, excuse me, in February, and more details will come about that, but I did want to let you all know that it's going to be centered around prominent Black activists in the climate and social justice space, so be on the lookout for that really important and inspiring conversation. We also have a Climate Advocacy 101 training. It's going to be on January 31st and on February 21st. Both of those days are Sundays. It's a 2-part training series, and it's designed for people who are new or newer to policy advocacy. We highly recommend you register for this training and go to both of them if you can.